And we're live, joined today by none other than the infamous Stephen Drum. Steve, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, Carole, thanks so much for having me. I think if we go back in the Wayback Machine, I think you were kind enough to have me on. It was probably my very first podcast.
I know.
And so it was like I don't know, it seems like, 4 years ago or something like that?
I actually went and looked it up. It was 2019. So
yeah.
A lot has happened and changed since then. So for all of you who are listening who are not familiar with Stephen Drum, let me fill you in a little bit. He is the author of Life on the X, which I want to talk about that in a moment. But one of the things that you need to know about Stephen Drum is that he is a combat-tested, retired Navy SEAL Master Chief with over 27 years of experience leading and developing high-performance teams in some of the most stressful situations that I can probably only imagine. Now, I have to let you know, Stephen, I didn't know that Master Chief was a thing outside of the Halo video game until I met you.
I know. The only time anybody knows what Master Chief is, but I'm intent on changing that, so I use it.
I love it. I love it. Well, and the funny thing is that I listen to Halo video game music almost all the time when I have to like focus or write or anything like that. And so every time I do, I immediately think of you. So just know that you're always in my thoughts when I'm focused on concentrating.
I'll take it.
Awesome. So I want to talk to you about the Life on the X, because when I first started reading your book, I didn't quite understand what that meant by life on the X. So can you tell me what that is and where that comes from, just to get everybody up to speed?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. My mom has always been my biggest critic, was like, and I was telling her what the title of my upcoming book was going to be. She's like, nobody's going to know what that is. I'm like, it's called the Curiosity Gap, Mom. But no, the X really, it comes from my time in the military, and it's a military doctrine term. But you can think of it almost quite literally as like X marks the spot, right? So, for example, if we were to fast rope out of a helicopter onto the rooftop of a building that we were assaulting, we would refer to that as landing on the X, right? That pinpoint location. We also use it if it's like, hey, we're going down the street, the enemy ambushes us and has us in that kill zone. We refer to that as the X as well. In that case, we got to maneuver, we got to get off the X. But the tie-in here to your everyday life, to the business world, is that we all have these specific moments, right? And sometimes they vary in terms of intensity and scope, severity, but there's these moments, whether it's in front of a client, a customer, giving a presentation, or me as a speaker walking out on stage. It's like, that's your X. You got to show up with intent, with preparation, with focus, with poise in order to maximize potential opportunities.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, this is drawing such a contrast for me right now, because I'm actually in a stage where I feel like everything is on the X for me right now. I have, big keynotes that are coming up, big clients that I'm helping out. The book just got published. And the thing that was another thing that made me think of you, because we've had these conversations about being prepared and mental toughness. And as I was sitting and just kind of reflecting on that, I realized 5 or 6 years ago, I would have been freaking out right now, totally stressed, like hair literally falling out. And I honestly feel pretty calm and relaxed. And like, yeah, the nerves are up a little bit and I feel a little bit of the pressure, but it's not debilitating. Is that what you mean?
That's right. And so we look at, like, you say the term stress.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes we say, hey, I'm stressed out. When really, stress isn't necessarily good or bad, right? If we feel distress, it means that's a way we definitely don't want to feel. That's a way we definitely don't want to act. But there's a little bit of stress, enough that it can sharpen our focus, that it can kind of align our intentions towards what's really important. And if we're not stressed out at all, then we could risk being complacent. So it's really having that fine line of like, hey, sharpness, focus, this is important. Let's kick it into gear. That kind of stress.
Yeah. Like just enough to keep you sharp and focused, but not so much that it's overwhelming you. And I don't know about you, but when I'm overly stressed or I'm in an acute stress situation, my first reaction is to withdraw, to hide, to go find someplace deep in the woods where nobody can find me. So there's got to be a balance there.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
How do you, I guess that's the thing I wanted to start with, is how do you balance that? Because we talk about mental toughness and preparedness, and I've always had this image of it as like, you're a tough guy, you're a Navy SEAL, the hoorah, like nothing gets to you. But I don't think that's what you're talking about.
No, it's not. I think I would invite even to have the conversation of, we talk mental toughness. I like to invite people to consider more broadly in terms of just toughness. And here's why. If you think of like a race car, right, you don't think of just the engine and horsepower. Like you also have to consider the brakes. You have to consider the tires, the frame of that vehicle in order for that whole package to perform at a high level. And so when I say toughness, it really means high performance, being your best in the face of difficult situations, because you're at the intersection of mental, physical, and spiritual or character fitness. So those three things. So for example, if I want to have a certain level of mental performance, be it cognition, be it emotional regulation, well, I've got to consider, well, do I have enough sleep? Am I eating healthy? Have I had movement? Am I generally in a good physical state? Because that really plays largely into my cognitive and emotional state as well. And my ability to be resilient, to keep going, to accept challenges, well, that's based on my character, based on my belief in self, my values, and adhering to a certain set of principles that I've laid out for myself.
Okay. So for the average person, mental toughness isn't about being, this combat ready Navy SEAL. I really like what you said there about the balance between the preparedness and the mental toughness and the spiritual side. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, how that plays into it?
Yeah, so when I say spiritual, and I always say, like when we were creating the Navy's Warrior Toughness program, we call about mind, body, soul, and we had Navy chaplains, which are the spiritual advisors for the military. And it wasn't necessarily religion. Now, if you're somebody who is of strong faith, it's about leaning into that faith. It's about leaning into connectedness, because we as humans are social creatures. But fundamentally, it's about really understanding what your values are. So your values, your personal beliefs, and being able to take those values and beliefs and distill those down into principles, which are you acting out every day those particular values and beliefs. And so really being able to be guided by those things. So when you tend to make bad decisions, you have that compass to get you back on track. When you suffer failure, you can look back and you can connect to that. And what I always do, I create a personal mission statement that I help people develop and have people hold you accountable to who you say you are and where you say you want to go.
Yeah. And I do similar work with salespeople when I'm helping them to identify what is their personally meaningful goal. I'm often having them dig into what is your personal value system, belief system? Where does that come from? And there are things that I see sometimes people struggle with that. Why do you think, or what gets in their way when they're not able to really identify what those are? And how do you help people work through those?
Well, there's a couple different ways. There's some easy ways. One of the most simple ways is I'll ask people, if you're not sure, you're like, I think I kind of got these as values or principles, but I'm not really sure. Well, here's an easy way to start. And I ask people to identify 3 people. Hopefully 2 out of those 3 people are people they know personally: mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, teachers, coaches, leaders.
Yep.
And maybe the third person is like a celebrity, somebody that they don't really know, but because of how they show up in the world and they have the certain attributes, characteristics, and they identify those 3 people, and then they identify why they admire those people in terms of their work ethic, compassion, honesty, toughness, whatever that is. And then write down attributes, what they are, and discover and pull those out, because 9 times out of 10, the attributes that you identify, those traits, those values, those people exhibit, are often the ones that are important to you. So I always recommend that as a good place to start. And from that, you create a statement every day. It's like a mission statement. It's, I do this, I am this. But where I think a lot of people go wrong is the second that they stray from that path, they fall short. They completely say, well, I'm an imposter, I'm a fraud. When in reality, that's just the human condition, right? We stray from the path, we fall short sometimes. But we acknowledge that, hey, we are still going to get back up, and we are still going to live our life moving forward with principles.
I love that. So can I ask, who are your 3? What's the value statement for yourself?
Well, I'll tell you, it's the 3 people that I've identified has changed over the course of my life and my career. But I will say that, and I'll tell you who they are. Initially, the people I looked, I said, it's my mother because of her toughness, her stoicism in the face of a lot of challenges she's had. Mm-hmm. My father because of his compassion and because of his humor. And my uncle because he's always calm, cool, collected as a former Navy pilot and a bunch of other stuff. But I have two. I have my personal mission statement and my professional mission statement. And I'll share my professional one. And it's not, like I said, nobody's going to be writing memes about this in 1,000 years, right? It's not that profound, but it doesn't have to be. It just needs to work for you. And mine is simply this. I'm a professional. I work to get better every day, even if it's just a little bit. I don't crumble when things get hard, but instead I choose to see opportunities in all situations, no matter how difficult, and I exist to be of service, right? So those three things keep me grounded, keep me aligned with the direction I want to go and how I best serve people.
I think this is an exercise I want to go through for myself because I feel like I've identified my belief system and my values. And if I could sum it up in a statement, I would say, you know, I strive to leave things in a better place than how I found them, whether that, you know, people or situations or environments or, you know, even just plants. I love to see the potential and growth in others. And my mission, my goal, my values is to leave those things in a better place than how I initially found them. And I don't know if I've ever identified the people that represent that for me, but I have identified experiences and situations that have helped me to kind of come to realize that. So I'm definitely going to take that as one of my takeaways from this to kind of explore and journal on that later. I also wanted to find out from you. I mean, you know that I talk with salespeople every day, and you and I have had this conversation about the role of mental toughness and how that plays out in sales. But for everyone who's listening or listening in later, what impact do you feel that this life on the X, this mental toughness, how does that impact us in sales, both from the individual contributor all the way up to the sales leader?
Well, I would say maybe there's a few exceptions out there, but everybody that I know, whether they're on a sales team in a corporate environment, whether they're a solopreneur or entrepreneur, I don't know any of them who don't feel a level of pressure, that don't feel that they're going to walk into a situation and potentially face curveballs. They're going to come here prepared to discuss this offering, to provide this solution, but now the client or the customer wants to go in a whole different direction. They execute everything to the best of their abilities and they get rejected. Well, guess what? Now you got to get back in your car and you got to go drive on to the next sales call, and you better rejock, reset, and be ready to give your best again. And so all these things create an element of pressure. You know, so a lot of times I'll work with pharmaceutical sales, and they may be attempting to gain access to this doctor for, let's say, 3-4 months, all they can do. And they're struggling, they're low on their numbers, and they've really got to get in there and have an impact with this doctor. It's really going to move the needle for them. And so there's a high level of pressure that goes with that. And so you can't go in there and flail. You can't go in there and just vomit forth your offering and forget that some of the fundamentals of connecting with this person, of trying to be a solution to their greater overall need, to establish that need, all the fundamentals of sales. If you don't go in there and be ready to pivot, be light on your feet, and be completely focused and attentive to the people on the other side of the table, then you're not going to perform at your best and you're not going to get the results that you desire.
I think there is going to be a meme now of the don't vomit your offering on your buyers is going to become a meme for me now. But you're so right, because there's, you know, as the individual contributor, you're feeling the pressure from your manager to meet your number. You know, when you get off that Zoom call or when you get off of that meeting, the first thing they're going to ask is, how is it going to go? When are they going to buy? And that pressure, what I find is that it creates, and I'm curious to see what you think about this, but it creates this almost emotional involvement where you're so busy talking to yourself in your head about what you need to do next that you're not actually present in the moment with the person who you're trying to converse with and connect with. And it just creates this, like you said, vomiting up your offering without even realizing that you are literally vomiting on them. Have there been times where you have found you feel like you're going into a situation, you've done all of the preparation, but then you get into it and you're like, I'm not as prepared as I thought I was. This isn't going well. I feel off kilter. Has that ever happened? Which I'm guessing it has. But then when it does happen, what do you do in those moments to start to turn it around again?
Yeah, and I think that definitely we've all had those moments. But I will again go back. we often get, and I talk about respond versus react.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes we find ourselves reacting, and sometimes through no fault of our own, right? A car swerves out in front of us on the highway, we react, or sometimes we react to bad news. But if we look ahead and identify moments that are important, and we're intentional, we're deliberate with success in those moments, when we get into those situations and things go sideways or we face a curveball, we shouldn't be reacting. Because when we react, right, worst case, we flail. It means we're caught off guard, we're unprepared. But if we respond, it means responding with the right choices, the right actions, the right preparation. And so when I go in there in that situation, I've already anticipated that the conversation go in a different direction. I need to talk about this, and this, but they want to talk about something else entirely. And I'm not prepared, but I've already considered that could happen. So I've already kind of war gamed what happens if I'm caught off guard.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not getting my objective, my primary objective. Okay, what's my secondary? What's my tertiary objective? How do I go there? Okay, you know what? I am not making a sale today. Okay, what can I do to maybe strengthen the relationship? Is there a way that has nothing to do with my product or my offering that somehow brings value to this situation, value to this relationship, mm-hmm. that long-term will actually serve me? And so I think it's a matter of, like, when all else fails, sometimes I teach a breathing technique. It's sometimes just stop and just take a tactical beat, take a tactical pause. Don't flail. Don't try to just make something happen, squeeze water out of sand. Just calm yourself and just allow yourself to be present, focused, and engaged, mm-hmm. and connect with people.
Yeah. I coach some salespeople that when you get in those moments to do exactly what you just do. And so I tell them about the box breathing method where, you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold it for 4 seconds, you let go for 4 seconds, you do that 4 times. And you can do that even in the midst of a call. Like literally, I just did that 2 seconds ago and nobody knew. But it does calm your nerves. It does slow down your breathing and your pressure point, so to speak, that allows you to then be, okay, a little bit more focused in the moment to be able to respond rather than just that emotional reaction like you were talking about.
That's right.
It's funny because I mean, even in not so high pressure situations, I find myself doing that. I'll even do things like I'll have a hair elastic on my wrist and sometimes I'll snap it, just like almost that physical feeling to bring me back into that present moment when I feel myself kind of like spacing out. There's all kinds of things to do in the moment as well as to prepare for that. Speaking of preparation, my husband often describes me as one of these people who is resilient, gritty. I see the potential. I won't give up on things. And he calls me mentally tough. But I also know that there are times where I don't feel that way or I haven't felt that way. But the school of hard knocks has kind of conditioned me this way. For those of us who maybe haven't been through the school of hard knocks or really aren't sure if we even have mental toughness, is this something that we can learn for ourselves? And if so, how?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can. Some people are going to be more naturally, broadly, you could say, tougher, right? There's some people that just tend to be unflappable no matter what. But I think no matter where we are, even if we're already performing at an A+ level, we can always get better. No matter where you are, you can always get better. You can be more focused. You can be more resilient. You can be tougher. And I think so some of the very basic things you already kind of touched on. You touched on with that breathing technique. Mm-hmm. That is both a physiological tool that creates a response that lowers our arousal, but it's also a mindfulness technique, just like the rubber band that you mentioned. When we breathe, we're not breathing for yesterday. We're not breathing for tomorrow. When we focus on our breath, it means we're focusing on the moment. There is performance psychology skills that you can use. A couple of the basic ones are mental rehearsal or visualization, putting yourself in that moment that that high stakes moment, that big opportunity. Well, put yourself in that moment. Visualize how you're going to perform. Visualize yourself executing perfectly. Visualize yourself being calm. Create a personal mantra or mission statement. Basically, like it's a statement that reminds you of how you prepared. It's a statement that guides your focus, your attention. Like I always have one that I'll use, right? That's sometimes I'm not the best listener always. So if I'm sitting with somebody, I'll say eye contact, lip contact, pause, respond. It's just a way to make sure that I'm focused and engaged. And I'm telling myself that, and it keeps me focused. And there's other things that you can use. And again, the breathing technique. So that's just to name a few.
Yeah, I have a little mantra in my head as well. Usually it's something along the lines of, I've got this, or this isn't the end of the world. Life will go on tomorrow. Like just these reminders that, this is not the be all and end all. And I think a lot of times, I think I feel like we're talking about is really having what they call a growth mindset, where you can always improve on whatever it is that you're doing. There's always room for improvement in anything, which brings me to my next question. Is it possible that we are running ourselves ragged because we're always looking for ways to improve? Is there a way to balance this where does the contentment with where you're at and the strive for always improving, where's the balance in that?
Well, I think that's a lot of that comes down to personality, right? Some people are constantly driven. Some people are excited. Like their identity is that of performance. I have a friend of mine, he's a podcast on performance, and every element of his life is geared towards performance. He's got a Whoop thing. He does the saunas, the cold plunges, the working out. Everything is geared towards that, and he loves that. But not everybody needs to do that. I'd say, again, if we want to go back to the things that I talked about mental, physical, spiritual, or character fitness. So we think of those as maybe represented by 3 individual buckets, right? Let's every day look at how we can put some energy into those 3 buckets in some way, shape, or form. And it doesn't have to be a lot, right? Are we somehow maybe doing some mindfulness work, some breathing work? Okay, just to make sure we're developing the frontal cortex part of our brain that's going to help with our focus, with our emotional regulation. Are we paying attention to how much sleep we get? Are we trying to get movement? Are we acting in accordance with the values that we've identified that are important to us? So just putting attention into each of those 3 buckets, I think, is a good way, and maybe a more minimalist way to approach it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And as you were describing it, I was reminded of the Unbound Growth logo. So you can see it in the corner there. It's the Celtic triskelion knot. And the reason I chose that as a logo is because it represents constant improvement, constant progression towards being better. And I like how it fits in so nicely with what you were talking about in the 3 areas of the physical and the spiritual and the mental, because we aren't one-dimensional human beings. Like being mentally tough is about more than just mental. It's all of the things that impact that, is what I hear you saying. Like, even myself, like having to monitor how much sleep I'm getting and noticing how it affects me in my next day. And when I need to show up for those moments is huge. And up until, I don't know, my 40s, it was just something that I thought it was, I'm going to fall asleep when I fall asleep. I never considered it a major part of everything else that I do. But is there areas where you find that most people don't consider fully? Is it the mental part? Is it the physical part? Is it the spiritual part? Or is it, again, part of their personality as to what they might find the most focused need for?
I don't know. It's going to obviously vary for each person. I think, again, if you're not really intentional with really saying, okay, I got to be good for this. I got to be good for this in my business. I got to be good as a parent, as a spouse, as a partner. And how do I do that? How do I dissect what's required to be at my best in those situations? And if you do that, and then you're saying, all right, I need to do this. Okay, well, I just have brain fog. I'm tired. I'm short of temper. Well, okay, what's my sleep look like? Maybe people aren't curious about that. Another thing I see is people they've just never considered just what it takes to practice, prepare, rehearse. You're like, oh, I want to meet with this client. This guy likes me, and it's going to be good. Okay, but maybe you got a good rapport, but are you really going to walk into that situation and help solve their problem for them? Or are you just kind of taking it for granted? Yeah. Right? Because people that I like doesn't mean that I necessarily am going to go to them to buy. Right? So I think it's a matter of just don't take moments for granted. Put the work in. Identify gaps in your particular performance. If it's, hey, I don't do anything in terms of mental cognition, emotional regulation. I don't do anything in terms of getting up and moving throughout the day. I don't do anything about tracking my sleep. So I would say ask yourself those questions in those 3 buckets.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what I'm hearing is a lot of this has to do with our willingness to become more self-aware and constantly becoming more self-aware. there are people that I've met, and I'm sure there are people that you've met, who you really wish that they could be more self-aware, but they're not. How do you handle those situations? And what's like the tactful thing to do or say? Because sometimes I just honestly just want to smack them upside the head and say, wake up, but that's probably not going to work, right?
Yeah, I would say it depends on who you're talking about. You're talking about a teammate, you're talking about a client or a boss. It kind of depends on the situation, but I think just maybe asking the right questions. I know I had a boss one time, and I could be a little hot-headed sometimes and impulsive. And he had a way of just asking a leading question. He would just ask the right question. You're like, kind of like, do you think what you're doing is in the best interest of the guys that we're leading right now?
Mm.
Do you think this is in keeping with the objectives that we have, with the guidance that we received? Just things like that. I mean, depending on where you are, you can just ask simple questions.
Yeah.
Are you okay? Or is everything going all right? Or is what I'm saying, am I making sense? Are you picking up what I'm putting down? Sometimes I find is a good way to just get people to maybe take a second look at how they're coming across.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm totally talking about one of my kids right now who I know is not going to listen about this later. So we're good. So my final question, and I know that you speak with a lot of organizations, both leaders and individual contributors, and I'm curious, when people come up to you after your talks, what is the most common number one thing that they're taking away from that?
I think it's it's like I can only pick one. I would say one of the things that resonates with everybody is the way I explain the need to be brilliant at the basics. And it's the most simple concept, but in practice, it's often taken for granted. It's all of the basic things. Like when you are under pressure, right? You don't want to have to be wasting time thinking about, all right, what was that study? What's that element of the product? No, you want to know that stuff like the back of your hand. Mm-hmm. You don't even want to have to think about it. Instead, you want all your attention and your energy to be on the environment, right? On the battlefield, right? That's who's going where, who's doing what, thinking 2 steps ahead of the enemy. In front of a client or a customer, it's being able to be completely locked on. It's anticipating where the conversation is going to go. When they ask me a question about my product, I take that for granted because I know that I got it, because I practiced, I trained, I rehearsed, I role played with my teammates. I know those things like the back of my hand. And it also boosts my level of confidence, knowing that I'm well prepared, that I'm well trained, that I know my stuff.
Yeah.
And high level of confidence, much higher likelihood you're going to perform at a high level.
I was literally just earlier today having this conversation with a C-level executive of a large team. And they said to me, this is just the basics. I said, yes, it's the basics, but the basics aren't basic. This is fundamental to everything that you're trying to do in your organization. And by mastering the fundamentals, that's what makes you a master. It's not Bruce Lee wasn't known for being a master because he had the craziest, funkiest kicks. It was because he had mastered the fundamentals of his craft. And that's what allowed him to do anything else. And I think sometimes, especially as seasoned professionals, whether you're in sales or in leadership, I think sometimes we take that for granted. The amount of work and preparation that you've put into something to practice it and rehearse it doesn't go away the more experienced you get. I think that the more experienced you get, the more need to focus on those fundamentals so that you don't become complacent. I think that's the key.
Well, and you're going to be seen under a greater microscope. I mean, the biggest pressure that I ever faced was as a leader because, not only do I have to think up and out in terms of a tactical leader, I also have to be seen as a subject matter expert in all of the soldiering skills, the individual Navy SEAL frogman skills. I have to be seen as being really savvy on those things, or I lose credibility as a leader. And so I think, to your point, absolutely. It's funny you brought up Bruce Lee. I think I'm trying to remember the quote, something like, don't practice 10,000 kicks. Practice one kick 10,000 times, something like that, right?
Yeah. Like, and I didn't even know that quote, but I don't even know why Bruce Lee came to mind for me. But thank you so much, Stephen, for joining us. If there is one piece of advice that you would give people as they consider how to build up their own mental toughness, what's the one thing you would tell them?
I would say if there's one thing, it would be look ahead and identify your moments on the X and think in terms of professional and personal. Mm-hmm. Identify your moment on the X and ask yourself, for me to go in there and face curveballs and challenges. What's it going to take for me to respond with intent, with poise, with focus, rather than just react?
Yeah, I love that. Stephen, thank you so very much. For everyone else who's listening, make sure that you go and check out Life on the X, an excellent book. It's one that I want to give to every salesperson, every sales leader that I've ever worked with, especially sales leaders and managers, because as you said, as a leader, the microscope is on you even more. And as I've had so many leaders tell me, their biggest fear is that their own shortcomings is going to become the collateral damage to their team. And they want to make sure that they're mastering those fundamentals so that that doesn't happen. Thank you so much, Stephen. Make sure you all check out Life on the X, follow him on LinkedIn. And until next time, everyone, keep learning, keep sharing out there, and have some fun. Thanks all.
Thanks, Carole.